Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of Intercultural Insiders. My name is John McGraw, and I help newcomers and expats connect across cultures to reach success in less time and pain. I am the founder of Hyaku Coaching, which is dedicated to helping you create your pathway to success in a new culture. The purpose of Intercultural Insiders is to share the stories of people with intercultural experiences. So if you're feeling isolated or lost, you can hear something from the guests' experiences that could help you, even if it's just a reminder that you're not alone. And welcome, as you may know, today is part 2 of the interview with Sachi Kikuchi. So a quick reminder of who she is and an update for those of you who may have missed last week's episode. Sachi is a translator, language instructor, and CEO of Kokoro Communications. She is bicultural, biracial, and bilingual. She has a Japanese father and Canadian mother, and she was born and raised in Canada. Now, last week we focused on her experiences growing up biculturally and her experiences both in Canada and Japan. And in today's episode, we will continue on with a little bit of that. But we will also move on to talk more about her work as a language educator and a translator and how she has used translation to help Nikkei, who are those of Japanese descent who may not have been born or raised in Japan, to reconnect with their Japanese heritage. And also how she has used her work to focus on disaster preparation and prevention and spreading that information, making that available as well. So this interview, as all of the interviews are, is pre-recorded, but Sachi is live in the chat. So please feel free to ask questions and comment during the interview because, again, your interaction really helps to make this experience even more engaging. And there are always opportunities to find out more and to share more that may not normally come up just from passively watching the interview. And just a reminder that one of the other great things about this show is that you have an opportunity to connect not only with the person who's the guest, but also those who are active in the chat as well. I have mentioned previously that in one episode that there was one guest, rather I shouldn't say a guest, but a participant in the chat who connected with another participant. This first participant had a background in project management and was still looking for work in Canada and had been looking for some time. And through connecting with this other participant who knew about an opportunity, they were able to connect. And from what I heard, that first person was able to get a job offer as a result. So there's a lot of things that you can get from just connecting with people who are active in the chat, even if it's not necessarily directly related to the guest in question. And again, another thing about the culture here in Canada is that if you are wanting something, it's okay to go ahead and ask for it, and you can speak to anyone. That's one of the beautiful things, particularly about LinkedIn. You don't have to be concerned if the person is the CEO of a company, for example. You can reach out to them, and the worst that they can do is ignore you. But those times that you step out there, you will have far more opportunities. I was talking actually recently with Anam, who is in the chat right now, attending the show, that if you reach out, maybe you only get responses from half the people, or maybe even less than that. But if you don't reach out, your response rate is 0. So you have nothing to lose by connecting with others here. So with that said, of course, let's get on to our interview, second part, the conversation with Sachi today. And please feel free, if you haven't already, to comment and say where you're joining in from in the chat, and let's have that conversation going during and after the interview. So without further wait, let's get into part 2 of the conversation with Sachi. For people who are struggling with that identity and having a similar experience to what you've had, is there anything that you could pass on to them based on your own experiences?
That's a good question. What really helped me was spending a lot of time thinking about it and being okay, sometimes at least, with not knowing. There were times that I really struggled with not knowing who I was or what my identity was, but I think that it is very helpful to be okay with not knowing, or be okay with the fact that you might be in that in-between or transition stage. Another thing that I also found very helpful was talking to other people who were perhaps struggling with their identity, or who had in the past struggled with their identity, who think about these kinds of things, because I think that people who think about and are aware of identity and what comes into play when it comes to figuring out your own, there are different things that come up, or different ways that we look at certain situations and certain people, certain cultures, society, expectations, things like that. And speaking with somebody who is aware or who has thought about these things can be helpful to sort through some of your thoughts or some of the things that are bothering you, maybe, perhaps, to help clear the path to figure out what works for you and who you decide that you are and that you want to be.
So maybe someone acting almost as a mentor or a coach.
Yeah, someone to bounce ideas off of, or they could be more, like a mentor or a coach.
I like what you say about being okay with not knowing. Really, when you're in any situation, being in a space of not knowing, that's an opportunity to grow, not necessarily rushing to find answers or try to come up with something, just be in that moment. And I think that can be for any kind of transitional stage. Getting back to your journey to Canada, where did things go from there?
I got back approximately 6 years ago. I did a fair amount of traveling. So I went to all sorts of places, traveled on and off, probably for about 2 years. And during that time, I was doing a little bit of freelance English teaching online, a little bit of freelance translation online as well. And then after I decided I needed to settle down and be in Toronto a little bit longer term, I ended up working for an AI company that has an office in Toronto as well as Tokyo. So I was using my language skills there for about a year and a half, maybe. I think I worked with them. And during that time, I was continuing to do some freelance work. And I think it was also during that time that I realized I wanted to branch off and work by myself. I wanted to be independent. So shortly after I left that job, I started studying, learning about what it meant to be an entrepreneur, to start a business. I started networking with other women entrepreneurs based mostly in the Greater Toronto area, but not exclusively. And then it was, shortly after that, I decided this was real and this is what I was going to do. The pandemic happened, and because none of us could go anywhere, I decided that was when I was going to learn all of my computer skills. So I learned how to build online courses, build websites. I took workshops on social media marketing and things like that, and have been focusing on Kokoro Communications, the business that I run on my own, in which I now have 2 staff members working with me, as well as working on developing the Japanese for Nikkei side with my friend. And here we are today.
Tell us about that name, Kokoro Communications.
So I think when I was younger, maybe about 15 or so, I used to take photos and I would sign them as Kokoro no Sachi. And you might be aware of the terms, I guess, Yama no Sachi and Umi no Sachi in Japanese, which are used to refer to food. So Yama no Sachi are the happiness or the blessings, I think you could translate them as, from the mountain. And the Umi no Sachi are the food, the happiness, whatever, from the ocean. And so food that you can get from the mountain or the ocean can be labeled as Umi no Sachi and Yama no Sachi. For those who don't know, kokoro means heart, but it's not the organ itself. It's the more emotional part of the heart. And I just used that and changed it to Kokoro no Sachi to refer to myself and I guess my online pseudonym sort of thing that I had fun playing around with. I think I used Kokoro to refer to myself as a pen name or a nickname online in some spaces. And when I decided to register my business, I spent, I don't know how many months trying to figure out the right name. And then I was speaking with a friend about it. And she was like, you talk about Kokoro all the time. Why not just use that? What's stopping you? And okay. And so that's just what it ended up being. So that's how we ended up with Kokoro. I have 2 staff members, like I mentioned. One of them is an English teacher. His name is Takuya. So Takuya and I do the main part of the service provision. So at the moment, I am teaching Japanese, doing the translation, and Takuya is teaching English. So Takuya has his own English teaching and coaching services. And then for the Japanese side, I do have an online course called Japanese for Flight Attendants. I have another online course, which I am in the middle of updating. It is called Japanese Phonetics 101 and focuses on anything and everything pronunciation related, including pitch accent, but not limited to pitch accent in Japanese. So these are the 2 online courses that I have. For the translation, back in the day, I used to take on a variety of different projects, but today, the 2 main fields that I focus on are disaster science and disaster recovery reconstruction, as well as going back to supporting Nikkei, so people who have Japanese ancestry or connections to Japan. I translate koseki or family registries and sometimes other related documents for people who have Japanese ancestors, but who no longer can speak or understand Japanese. And so by me translating these different types of documents for them, they are able to, for example, reconnect with relatives who are still in Japan. They are able to learn more about their family history. They are able to learn more about their parents or grandparents, or in one case, able to create a documentary. So these are the 2 areas, yes, that I focus on for the translation.
What can you say about the documentary, about some of these other things that you've been doing in terms of connecting people?
The documentary actually came out a few years ago. The director's name is Randall Okita. It is a virtual reality documentary. I'm not quite sure where it can be accessed, but in this documentary, Rand goes through the person with the VR set. He guides the viewer through learning about his family history and guiding them through the trip that Randall's grandfather made from Japan to Canada during the internment of World War II, rebuilding a life after that, and just everything that goes into it, showing some photographs, including some conversations that Randall had with his father. I think he includes some memories that he had with his grandfather as well from childhood.
Now, I'm wondering where to access that.
I'll see if I can find a link or something to share with you.
I'm sure that would be something that a lot of people would be very interested in, myself included. So connecting people who have the ancestry but can't speak the language, what's the significance of that to you?
For me, it brings me a lot of joy to know that I can help people understand where they come from. I can help people, in some cases, fill a void. For a lot of Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans, their language and culture was taken away from them forcefully. And if I can do even something small to help them understand better or reconnect, perhaps communicate better or find the homes or the homeland of their ancestors, even if I'm not necessarily there to experience all of those emotions or adventures with them, I do find it incredibly rewarding to be that person who can support them and build that bridge to help them get where they want to in order for them to feel better, to feel satisfied, to have a better understanding of who they are and where they come from. But on the more academic side, I find it to be a really fun challenge to learn and to be forced to learn all of these different kanji that are no longer in use today. So other people who study Japanese outside of Japan will learn kanji, of course, that are used today. And that was what I learned as well. But taking on these types of translations forces me to learn different vocabulary, different kanji that are no longer in use. And that is a personally gratifying experience. It brings me a lot of joy.
What's one example of a kanji that you came across in those studies that really stood out for you?
I think the easiest example for that is the numbers. The present day format of the koseki, or the family registries used in Japan, this formatting began in the late Meiji period. So I believe it was like the 1880s or so. So at that time, the kanji used for numbers was different from what they are now. And in translating koseki, learning how to read these old numbers was one of the most important things. And yeah, it was a little scary, but also very exciting and very rewarding to be able to learn how to read these numbers.
I'm curious, how far back did you find yourself going through some of these records?
The oldest that I've worked with is from the late Meiji era, so approximately 1880s. And present day ones that are fully digitized and you have to go and get a printout of them if you would like a copy. I've worked on some of those as well. They are obviously significantly easier to read. The formatting has also changed a little bit. The information is presented in a much simpler and more concise way than they used to be. But yeah, so the oldest ones are probably about 1880s or so. Of course, all handwritten. And then you have photocopies of photocopies. So it can be a little bit of a challenge to read sometimes. I do think that it allows people to connect with and better understand things that they may not necessarily have been able to do so otherwise. But to be honest, this is, I think, one of the few things that I actually can do, at least long term. So for me, it feels like the only option, but it is also something that I take a lot of pride, and I feel it's a privilege that I'm able to do this and that my clients trust and appreciate the work that I do. I think that all translation work is very important and very valuable because it allows access to information, which I think is very important because not everybody can learn every language to read and understand every document out there. So there have to be people like me who create opportunities for that understanding and learning. I feel grateful that I'm able to do the work that I do and connect people and help them. I think about it as helping them feel better, but I think it does boil down to and come back to this concept of kokoro, where I put my heart into it and I really value the heart and soul and the intention and the desires of my clients and making sure that they feel just as happy, if not happier, that I do when it comes to handling these different types of documents and the content, the information that they include.
It just shows how smart your friend was for telling you to use Kokoro as the name. It's clearly.
Yeah, definitely very grateful. It's the perfect name, really.
What's a question that I haven't asked you yet that you want to answer?
Oh, I would love to talk a little bit about the disaster science work that I do.
Okay, please tell us about that.
Yeah, so it comes back to my decision initially to move to Japan. I was a university student when the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami occurred. Of course, that also triggered the nuclear meltdown in Fukushima. And it was around that time that I decided that I wanted to live in Sendai in Japan. So up until that point, I knew that I had wanted to live in Japan. But I was thinking either Hiroshima or Tokyo. Tokyo in part because I have family there, and Hiroshima because I wanted to be involved in peacekeeping and anti-war type activities that are occurring there today. But when the disaster happened, I decided, nope, Sendai is the place that I'm going to. And so when I moved to Sendai, exactly 1 year and a half after the disaster, I went there with a desire to volunteer or do what I could to help the area rebuild and recover from this disaster. And it was shortly after I moved there that I became friends with somebody who was doing research work relating to disaster recovery. And it was through this person that I got my foot in the door with the Disaster Science Research Institute at the University of Tohoku, or I guess Tohoku University is their official English name. And since then, I have been doing translation work with a number of the professors and other staff members that do work with them relating to disaster science, disaster recovery, telling the stories of the survivors. And about a year ago, maybe just under a year ago, I was working with some professors there on a book called, I believe the English title is 51 Lessons from the 2011 Great East Earthquake. So I had the privilege of translating this book written by professors on 51 different ways to look at the disaster and what we can learn from it, what we can take away from it, and how we can change our perspectives and how we deal with disasters in the future. And the chapters, I believe, will be available online to download in English within the next few months. I don't exactly know when, but I know it's coming.
And what is the significance of that for you to be involved in a project like that and bringing that to people outside of Japan?
It is something that I feel very passionate about, even though I think that natural disasters are very common in Japan, and I am under the impression of, and I apologize if I'm wrong on this, but I'm under the impression that Japan is one of the countries that puts a lot of effort into understanding how to work with and recover from natural disasters. Probably one of the places that I guess puts the most amount of time and energy into it. But natural disasters can occur anywhere. And I think that, for example, for those of us who live in Canada, or at least in the Toronto area, these are not things that we think about. It's incredibly safe here, incredibly safe. We don't have earthquakes. Usually we don't have earthquakes. We don't get tsunamis. We don't really have to worry so much about like hurricanes or these other types of storms. We are starting to get tornadoes in the area. But I do think that with climate change, some of these things are going to change. And then, of course, with the amount of traveling that we all do, it does not hurt anyone to understand what it means to protect yourself and protect your loved ones, no matter when or where you may end up in a natural disaster. So one of the things that I would really like to continue doing is taking on translation jobs, working with professors and researchers who focus on disaster science, recovery, protecting life, and using that as an opportunity to do my best to share this information that I believe everyone should know about. But I know that if it's in English, it will be available to and easier to understand by a larger global population. So to help non-native Japanese speakers to understand and have this information accessible to is something that I really want to do moving forward.
Your passion for that, that's just apparently you're speaking about it right now.
Also, logically and academically and professionally, I find it really rewarding because I learn so much that I wouldn't have any opportunity to learn about otherwise unless I go back to school and get another undergrad or whatever it is. It's a great opportunity, and they've all been such wonderful people to work with. So I'm very grateful to have the connections and the opportunities to work with them.
Sounds amazing. We're coming up close to the end of our time. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Not that I can think of, I guess, other than to reiterate what we do, like the services that we provide at Kokoro Communications, as well as over at Japanese for Nikkei. So for anyone who is interested, kokorocommunications.com is the homepage where you can see the services that I and Takuya provide. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, and a number of other different places. I'm trying to post more to YouTube, so that is a thing that I want to work on. Again, we teach Japanese and English and also provide translation. And then over at Japanese for Nikkei, we focus on helping Nikkei reconnect or connect with their Japanese ancestry or Japanese connections through Japanese language teaching. And JapaneseForNikkei.com is the website for that one.
It's been a real pleasure, an honor to have you on the show, someone who's been able to develop yourself into being a bridge between cultures and particularly connecting those who, as you had said, maybe had lost the connection to their culture through circumstances that weren't under their control. That's very significant and very powerful. Thank you very much for coming on here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always lots of fun to talk about all the different things that I'm perhaps a little bit too passionate about, but I could talk about them forever. So it was lovely chatting with you, and thanks to all the listeners who might consider reaching out at some point in the future.
And so that was part 2 of the conversation with Sachi. And during that conversation, of course, you mentioned a lot of resources which I think weren't completed or available at the time that we had the conversation, but are available now. And for those of you who've been following along in the comments, I'm sure you can see all of the links that Sachi has provided. And I've done my best to also create QR codes for them so that you can reach them another way. So just to cycle through, of course, quick, there's the Kokoro Communications. So if you're watching this on recording, you can just simply pause it and then to scan effectively, because I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. And also the documentary that she mentioned earlier, the title of it, the VR documentary, is The Book of Distance. So you can find, this isn't a link directly to the documentary, but it's information about it, and also has some information on where you can find it. Apparently it's available on a lot of VR platforms like the Oculus website and Steam, for those of you who are into PC gaming. And also, you mentioned her book about Koseki, the family registry. So you can find the free download right here as well to get some more information about that. And also the English portions of the English version of the Book of Disaster Prevention, which is available for free. Apparently, if you want the Japanese version, as Sachi mentioned in the comments, you need to pay for it. So there you can get it for free in English. And again, obviously very important to have, useful information to have in case there is some emergency that comes up. So a lot of things that that came up from that conversation. Again, as I mentioned in the comments myself, the idea of March 11th, 3/11. I was in Saitama. I was actually in Tokyo right at the moment when it happened, but I was living in Saitama at the time. So the fact that Sachi was willing to move specifically to Sendai, to the area that was affected by the disaster, to be able to help there is really something that's quite admirable. And as well, as we've mentioned in the interview, the ability to act as a bridge to be able to spread that valuable information that otherwise would be available only in Japanese really shows the value of what Sachi is doing in leveraging her ability, her language abilities, to help create the world, make the world a better place, even in a small way or a larger way. And yeah, some of the great comments as well here that I'm going to highlight as well. Yes, and Chie Schuler also seems to agree. Thank you, Sachi, for supporting the effort to share lessons from 3/11 with the world, and all of the other wonderful things you do to help people connect with Japan. So yeah, it's greatly appreciated by many people, I think. And that's really I think the point of connecting with other cultures, is that, of course, you can get some benefits out of it yourself, but ultimately, I think the ultimate goal is to be able to act. If you can act as a bridge between cultures, then the impact is huge and far greater than you might even realize. So thank you again, Sachi, for being on the show and for doing what you do. So next week, we have another great guest, talking with Daisy Wright, who is an executive career coach, and she lives in Toronto, but is also an immigrant. And she is also the self-titled Chief Encouragement Officer and the author of many books for finding your career and following your career in Canada. And one notable one is No Canadian Experience, very valuable for newcomers and immigrants who are running into the barrier of no Canadian experience in the job market. And I'm sure that that's something that many newcomers find frustrating as well. So with that conversation with Daisy, she talks about her cross-cultural experiences growing up in Jamaica and working for the United Nations, and what to do when you face the no Canadian experience barrier, and key points to adjusting to life in Canada based on her own experiences and what she's seen with other immigrants and newcomers as well. So I'm very excited to have Daisy on. She shares a lot of valuable insights and just the energy, Chief Encouragement Officer. After the conversations I've had with her, I think that's an excellent title for her. So really looking forward to that. Again, that's available Wednesday, April 26th, usual time, 12 noon Eastern time. So until then, keep navigating between cultures towards your goals. See you next time.